Tonight, I will turn down any approach from the BBC. That was a month ago. But what do you know? Mark Thompson has got the top job in British broadcasting. Is this the man to repair the damage done by the fallout from Lord Hutton's report? Just what happened when 40 people were killed in the western Iraqi desert, but not an American soldier wounded? We ask one of the US's top military leaders to explain. And we hear claims of how the Americans and their allies have been using third countries to torture terror suspects. Good evening. Tonight, Greg Dyke, who quit as Director General of the BBC over the Hutton report, warned his successor, Mark Thompson, watch your back. But the new DG, along with the new chairman, Michael Grade, have been described as an outstanding team by the Cultural Secretary, Tessa Jowell. Key to Thompson's success will be his handling of charter renewal. At Channel 4, he returned the broadcaster to its core business and profitability. So what's he likely to change at the BBC? Here's Richard Watson.
The man who couldn't stay away. Mark Thompson, the new Director General of the BBC, has returned to the organisation in which he built his career. He's the 13th DG and follows luminaries such as Lord Reith, and replaces Greg Dyke, who was forced to resign following severe criticisms of BBC management contained in the Hutton report.
I'm incredibly proud and privileged to have been chosen to do this job for the BBC. The BBC is the greatest broadcasting organisation in the world.
And this move from the man who recently told Newsnight he had no intention of rejoining, saying, "I absolutely intend to stay at Channel 4 and deal with the uncertainty and challenging questions in Channel 4's future." But the challenge of carving out a future at the BBC in the digital age proved too tempting for Thompson, who's steeped in public service broadcasting. Currently, he has the top job at Channel 4. But Mark Thompson started his career as a BBC production trainee in 1979, rising to edit Panorama in 1988, becoming controller of BBC Two in 1996, and finally director of television 4 years ago.
Speaking on behalf of the governors, the board that is, I can say we were impressed by Mark Thompson's analysis of the challenges facing the BBC, and of course by his track record.
So what's Mark Thompson's track record like? Commentators say that while heading up Channel 4, he's had the populist touch. And certainly glancing through Saturday night schedules, it would seem to confirm this. There's certainly no sign of any documentaries on Victorian orchid collectors or anything like that. In fact, it's extremely populist. 7:15, Earthquake 10.5, Part 1 of an American disaster epic. 9 o'clock, How Friends Changed the World. That's the US comedy series. And 11:05, another very popular film, When Harry Met Sally. Mark Thompson has big shoes to fill. Greg Dyke's resignation following the Hutton report was mourned by some who welcomed their former boss's down-to-earth style. Urging managers to cut the crap by cutting red tape was just one winning phrase. For many, Dyke was the populist's populist, aggressively scheduling programmes against ITV for ratings, ploughing money back into sports and pulling a rabbit out of the hat by making BBC's digital services free to view. But for some, the strategy went too far.
One of the things that was beginning to characterise Greg Dyke's BBC was, fantastically up feeling on the inside, blissfully unaware of the anxiety growing on the outside about what the BBC was, the way it was behaving. Was it appropriate for a publicly financed organisation like the BBC to be quite as aggressive and commercial as it was?
As well as investing in US imports like Friends and The Simpsons, Mark Thompson is credited with turning around Channel 4's financial losses, and these skills may yet prove vital in the new job, especially if the BBC licence fee deal rises by less than inflation.
It's inconceivable that the next licence settlement will be RPI plus. It may even be RPI minus, at which point you have a huge organisation, more than 20,000 staff, 7 TV channels, God knows how much else, all on with great forward momentum. And working out how to run that, which is demanding more cash when you've only got the licence fee, which is going down in real terms, is going to be the major challenge.
But the short-term challenge for the new DG is to lead the BBC out of one of the biggest crises in its entire history, Hutton.
BBC News, which is a division I worked in for many years myself, and was did just about every job in, from trainee researcher to programme editor, has got some of the best journalists and the highest journalistic standards in the world. And I think BBC News should look to the future with real confidence in its professionalism.
Tonight, the minister responsible for negotiating new funding arrangements with the BBC welcomed his appointment.
Together with Michael Grade, they are a couple who will lead the BBC through charter review and ensure that the BBC is strong and independent of government.
The licence fee is unlikely to be radically changed this time round, but in years to come, when the old analogue TV and radio signals are turned off and everyone is digitally connected, the argument for keeping the licence fee for one organisation will be much harder to make, when everyone has choice and non-payers can simply be turned off. So securing a sustainable future of whatever kind for public service broadcasting is the major challenge ahead.
Richard Watson, I'm joined by David Elstein, who is the former Chief Executive of Channel 5, and from Norwich by Richard Baer, the former Controller of BBC Editorial Policy. David Elstein, what do you think his pitch was?
I don't think he had a pitch. I think they pitched to him.
Is that healthy?
Well, that's how he got the Channel 4 job in the first place. I mean, the thing about Mark Thompson is he is an outstanding executive. He understands public service television, top to bottom, and has a rather sophisticated version of it available if you choose to ask him. But he would not have gone for an interview without being almost certain that he was going to be offered the job, and therefore he wouldn't have had to make any kind of heavy pitch for it.
But what kind of BBC will Mark Thompson create, Richard Baer, do you think?
Well, I agree with David, and Mark Thompson's pitch, if that's the right word for it, was his experience, and he clearly had experience which was broader than any of the other known candidates, particularly his commercial experience the last couple of years, which none of the others really had. The sort of BBC he'll go for, I guess, in the short term, it's going to be an intelligent BBC because he's a wildly intelligent individual. But as we've seen at Channel 4 and previously when he ran BBC 2, he's also the sort of leader who's able to inspire some popular programming. Remember that DGs don't make programs, they don't even manage people who make programs, they barely manage people who manage people who make programs in the BBC. What they
well, that may change, of course.
They do set the tone in which the people who come up with program ideas expect to have those ideas accepted. And my guess would be that will be a pretty liberal and encouraging tone, and that's why I think it's good news for BBC program makers, and therefore, by definition, I hope for viewers and listeners too.
Well, before we go on to talk about what the viewers might expect, let's just deal very briefly with Hutton. With the appointment of Michael Grade, very quickly followed by Roly Keating at BBC 2 and now Mark Thompson, is a sense that Hutton has been, as it were, swept away, David Elstein?
Yes, the great advantage of Mark Thompson as opposed to the leading internal candidate, Mark Byford, is he was not associated in any way either with the journalism that caused Hutton or the inquest that followed Hutton. So his hands were clean, just as Michael Grade's hands were clean. And I think that appointment confirms that the BBC has, in a sense, passed through the cauldron of fire and is through the other side. Now, there's a much tougher task ahead. I mean, Hutton was a blip, really, in an 80-year history of an institution. What you're looking at next is a really tough charter review, and that's where they need somewhat of Mark Thompson's quality, and urgently.
Well, in fact, at Channel 4, Mark Thompson shed Channel 4's interactive services. He returned to core business, he returned to profitability. Are we going to see a pared-down BBC, a plan for a pared-down BBC?
Well, I don't think he's going to change very much, because I think Greg Dyke made clear that the BBC had, in a sense, reached the limits of its ambitions with the launch of its latest round of radio and TV services. What I think Mark was very careful to do when he was at Channel 4 was not join the chorus calling for the licence fee to be top sliced and some of the licence fee to be applied to the commercial sector.
Clever.
Far-sighted, shall we put it that way. But, you know, a genuine view and a well-argued view. But I think what will be most interesting about Mark is whether he can row back from his Banff speech of 5 years ago, where he made the case for every BBC channel to be individualised like radio, which Jana Bennett, his successor, has discovered doesn't really work in political terms.
So, Brigadier, will the viewers notice a difference? What will the viewers see that is, as it were, has a stamp of Mark Thompson on it?
Well, remember, it takes a pretty long time for, particularly on television, for the effect of any Director General to come through. So it's going to be a year or two before we see any direct impact, I think, other than in any appointments or reshuffles that he may choose to make among the top programme teams. But I think, going back to what David was saying, David Elstein has been arguing for donkey's years now, almost for generations, that the licence fee should not be the way of supporting the BBC. And although he's not going to win that argument, David Elstein isn't this time, and you've just heard Tessa Jowell being yet again supportive of the BBC, it clearly becomes a more and more difficult argument for successive Directors General and Chairman of the BBC to make. The licence fee becomes more and more difficult to support, and the BBC, under probably now the leadership of Thompson and Grade for, so far as we can guess, some years to come, will have to tackle the question of how the BBC starts to better diversify its sources of income, and it'll also have to answer the challenge to whether it's expanded too fast in order to bring on digital uptake. Whether it has too many channels, digital channels, which at least a lot of the audience think simply aren't watched.
Well, tell me, who's going to be the boss, David Elstein? Is it going to be Michael Grade or is it going to be Mark Thompson?
Michael Grade is chairing the governors. He's not going to get involved in how the organisation is run. Mark Thompson's a very effective leader of organisations, as he's already shown at Channel 4. He'll be the boss inside the organisation.
And will he have learnt something from the culture at Channel 4 that he might bring into the BBC?
What I think he'll have learned from Channel 4 is that commercial television is not frightening, that the quality of executives and decision-making over there is not so fantastic that anyone in the BBC need hide. But what it also tells everyone, I'm afraid it's a lesson for BBC executives, not only is a whole generation of them wiped out in terms of their ambition to be DG, but if you don't leave the BBC, they don't really value you, even if you only leave for 2 years. It's remarkable. Mark Thompson came nowhere last time round in the DG stakes. Mark Byford came second. This time he sailed through.
Well, thank you both very much indeed. Hundreds of prisoners were released today by the Americans from the Abu Ghraib prison in Baghdad. But once more, the images were completely overshadowed by the continuing scandal over prisoner abuse. This evening, the Pentagon has announced that it's investigating 8 more suspected murders of prisoners. Further graphic evidence of the abuse was released earlier today when the Washington Post put video on its website showing detainees being humiliated by US soldiers. It also published more photographs and sworn statements by prisoners who describe in raw detail what went on inside. The paper says it has hundreds more pictures, several digital videos also of the abuse. So this scandal looks like it will dog the Bush administration day by day. Earlier today, I spoke to the former Commander-in-Chief of US Central Command, General Joseph Hoare. He gave evidence this week before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and I asked him what his assessment was of the overall situation in Iraq.
I thought that it was still very possible that we could pull this out, but we were standing at the abyss, and unless there were some rapid changes made very quickly, I thought it was only going to get worse and then would not be recoverable.
What rapid changes do you want to see?
This group of people in the policy cluster continue to make bad decisions about how they're going to do the reconstruction. And I don't think they deserve to get any more chances. I think that the whole crowd needs to be fired, and that you need to put the State Department in charge. And this is, after all, a counterinsurgency campaign, and the political issues far outweigh the military and the developmental issues. They need to be subordinate to the political considerations.
Is the way to restore confidence to sack Donald Rumsfeld?
I've said that publicly on several occasions, and Mr. Wolfowitz as well. Their track record in the last year has been very poor, in my judgment.
Well, also today, the Americans have come under more pressure to explain how up to 40 people were killed in an airstrike earlier this week in the desert in western Iraq. The US say they were targeting suspected foreign fighters in a safe house. Iraqi police and eyewitnesses say they attacked a wedding party, and among the dead were women and children. Well, this evening I spoke to Brigadier General Mark Kimmit in Baghdad. I asked him to explain his version of events.
We were conducting a military operation at about 0300 the morning of the 19th. We had significant intelligence that indicated this was a group of smugglers, a smuggling route, and possibly a significant number of foreign fighters. We launched our forces, we took hostile fire, we returned fire. Our ground force elements swept through the objective. We saw a significant number of casualties, but we also picked up a significant amount of intelligence which would indicate that this target was what we said it was, and we're continuing to exploit that intelligence now.
What did you recover?
Well, we picked up weapons, we picked up foreign passports, we picked up about 2 million Iraqi dinar, we picked up some satellite communications equipment.
It's well known to you that people in that village say there was a wedding going on and people were coming from across the border in Syria for it. There's no mobile or telephone coverage, so satellite phones are not unusual. And sheep and other animals are smuggled over the border. Did you bust up an innocent wedding?
As I said earlier, the intelligence we had was corroborated by our operations on the ground.
Do you accept that a number of children have been killed, perhaps from American air cover?
No, we don't accept that. Again, our soldiers swept through the objective. They were on the ground for a significant period of time. They reported that they did not come across any dead children as part of that operation.
It's difficult to reconcile these two versions of events.
Oh, I would accept that we're having a hard time trying to make these two versions come together.
If it turns out you did attack a wedding party, will you have done significant damage to your efforts in Iraq?
We accept any time that there is collateral damage that puts us back a little bit of the way. And that's why we're so precise in our operations. That's why we use redundant intelligence before we execute our operations. And I think our record is very clear that we are running extraordinarily precise operations to exactly minimize the collateral damage that we know would set us back if we took it.
What I do not understand is that if you launched a raid in this area, if you had ground force and air power, if people survived the raid, why did you not take any prisoners?
We didn't have anybody on the ground at the end of this operation.
But you had people on the ground during the operation.
There were people that were casualties that were at that location. That's correct.
But I thought you did have ground forces in the area.
We do have ground forces in the area. It was the wide open desert. It is 85 kilometers southwest of Qaim. It's about 10 kilometers from the border. It's a very, very barren region. There were only a couple of outbuildings out there. So we don't typically patrol that area.
If you had ground forces at the site, why did you not take prisoners to exact information?
Again, there was a significant amount of hostile fire on our forces. Our forces returned fire.
Today there was a release of a video and more photographs from Abu Ghraib prison. Wouldn't it be a better plan to release everything you have and get it out into the open?
Well, we're not the ones that are releasing the information. This is all part of classified reports. Somebody has got it. It is being controlled by somebody other than the military in terms of what's being released. I understand that some of the later videos may be being released by the Department of Defense, but it's important to realize that a classified document somehow was leaked, and the person who had those documents and had those photos were the ones that were leaking it on their terms, not ours.
Wouldn't the soldiers prefer the military had control of it and could deal with it?
I think as a soldier, I was appalled by what I saw. I was disgusted by what I saw. I have said many, many times when I saw those photos that those photos are absolutely inconsistent with what we stand for as a military. But quite frankly, that was a small number of people, small number of detainees. Horrible though it may be, it is not reflective of the 135,000 soldiers that we have over here serving proudly.
Finally, General Joseph Hoare, a former Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Central Command, told the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, "I believe we are absolutely on the brink of failure. We are looking into the abyss." Is that a picture you agree with?
I've got a tremendous amount of respect for General Hoare. He hasn't been over here in quite a while. He may be reading the media accounts of what's happening over here. I would ask him to come over, and after he's had a good view of the situation on the ground for himself, if he still feels that way, then I would be concerned. But I wouldn't think that he would feel that way if he was able to get over here.
General Kimmit, thank you.
Thank you.
The International Committee of the Red Cross voiced renewed concern today about an unknown number of detainees rounded up in the US global war on terror and being held secretly in various countries. And tonight, a NEWSNIGHT investigation reveals claims that some suspects are being sent from one state to another for torture. Here's Peter Marshall.
A stranger in a strange land. Hopper Habib has flown from Australia halfway around the world to tell the world about her husband's imprisonment. At Heathrow, she's suddenly taken aback by one overt sign of the war on terror. The family's lawyer explains.
After what Maha's gone through and what she's heard, she's obviously quite upset at the moment. What the trigger was just walking out here is she saw a policeman with a loaded MP40 submachine gun. And I think that's bringing it all home to her, exactly what her husband's going through.
Her husband is Mahmoud Habib, one of hundreds of prisoners moved around the world for interrogation in the war on terror. His latest stop, Guantanamo Bay. Until a few weeks ago, the Londoner Tarek Dergoul was there with him. He's now been released.
I was interrogated at gunpoint. I was beaten by an interrogator. I was refused medical treatment, which led to my toe being amputated.
Mrs. Habib has come to Britain to get news of her husband from Dergoul. He's told her that before Guantanamo, Mahmoud Habib had been subjected to still worse treatment. At the behest of the Americans, he'd been sent to another country for torture.
What I've heard since I've been here from a person who's been released from, these, he said that he was told by Mahmoud that he was tortured, he was electrocuted, he was injected drugs, and he was bashed and whatever you can think of.
Habib's story is that, suspected of supporting Islamist extremists, he was picked up in Quetta, Pakistan on October the 5th, 2000. Although he's an Australian national and had long ago renounced his Egyptian citizenship, the Australian government didn't intervene to prevent his removal to Egypt and prison.
What we understand is that the Australians and the Americans were working hand in hand to facilitate this transportation to Egypt.
So you think the Americans are behind this?
Yes.
After 5 months incommunicado in Egypt, he was flown to the US military prison at Bagram in Afghanistan. From there, he wrote to his wife to give her bare details of what had happened and where he'd been.
They kidnapped me and put me in jail in Pakistan. After this, they took me to Egypt. They take me to Egypt and try to make me change citizenship to Egyptian. I refused.
In fact, she's now learned the reality of an Egyptian prison was far worse. It seems what happened to Mahmoud Habib was he'd been rendered, a phrase coined by US intelligence for individuals picked up by or at the wish of the US and taken to a country where interrogation procedures pay little heed to international law. What goes on in US prisons in Iraq or Afghanistan or Guantanamo Bay has become known by the cynics' term torture light. What happens in Egypt or some other Middle Eastern states is far worse. That, it's said, is the point. Robert Baer is a CIA veteran who knows all about the process of rendition and doesn't approve.
Well, in Egypt, the overall purpose is really it's an instrument of deterrence. I mean, it's striking fear into the population. It's not so much to collect intelligence. Because some of the stuff coming out of Egypt, the intelligence I've seen is just god-awful. But what it does, it intimidates Islamic groups, the Muslim Brotherhood, people like that. Another purpose is just to get these people off the street. If you suspect them, there's not enough to bring charges against them, but you think they're up to no good, then you send them to Egypt. You never hear from them again.
Rendition may be prohibited by international law, but a memo written on January the 25th, 2002 by the White House counsel Albert Gonzales states that the war on terrorism, in my judgment, renders obsolete Geneva's strict limitations on questioning of enemy prisoners.
Gonzales goes through legal gymnastics to try to explain why the Geneva Conventions don't apply to the conflict in Afghanistan or the conflict against al-Qaeda. He's wrong as a matter of law, but even if he were right, he completely ignores a separate body of law, the Convention Against Torture, that flatly prohibits most of the coercive interrogation techniques used in Bagram or Guantanamo, and also completely prohibits rendering any suspect to a place where there are substantial grounds to believe that torture is practiced, places like Egypt or Syria.
He was at JFK Airport in New York, in transit for his home in Canada, when Meher Ara, a Canadian citizen, was arrested by the Americans. The next he knew, he was forcibly flown to the Middle East, to Syria.
I knew when I was put in the plane on this private jet that I was going to be tortured, and so I was thinking all the time how I could avoid torture. And the first day they asked me routine questions. The beating started on the next day, and they could not believe that the Americans would send someone like me to Syria if he is innocent. And basically they just tried to extract as much information as possible by torturing me.
He now tends to blink excessively, a result of almost a year held in darkness.
They put me in a cell that was 3 feet wide, 6 feet long, and 7 feet deep. It was like a grave, the size of a grave, and I was kept in that place for 10 months and 10 days.
Tonight, the Syrian government described the allegations as baseless. They suggested it was an attempt to draw attention away from pictures of American crimes and torture. The Egyptians too denied torturing Mamdouh Habib. His whereabouts now are finally confirmed. After being rendered from country to country, he's officially incarcerated in Guantanamo Bay. The legality of it all is another matter.
The effect of what's happened with the conduct of the war on terrorism is that the Western powers, particularly America, have themselves abandoned the institutions of freedom and democracy. The notion of due process, justice, and they've descended into savagery. We've lost it. We've lost the war on terrorism because we didn't stick to our principles.
A quick roundup of today's headlines. A policeman has been stabbed to death while attempting to make an arrest in Birmingham. Detective Constable Michael Swindellis was 44 and married with a teenage daughter. His chief constable described him as a very brave officer. Officers were called to the Needless area of the city after receiving a report of a man armed with a knife. They made a search for the suspect, and as they went to apprehend him, Mr. Swindellis was stabbed. The government has welcomed a study into the extent of variant CJD, the human form of mad cow disease. The analysis of 12,000 tonsil and appendix samples has found 3 that may have been affected. The researchers say their results mean that as many as 4,000 people in the UK could carry the disease, but say that their study should be treated with caution. President Putin of Russia has promised to speed up the ratification of the Kyoto Protocol on cutting greenhouse gases. With the US strongly opposed to Kyoto, the protocol cannot become law without the support of Moscow. The Russian offer came after the European Union agreed to back its application to join the World Trade Organization. And the markets, the FT 100 share index was up, while in New York the Dow Jones closed up. Against the euro, the pound was up. Against the dollar, the pound was also up. Tomorrow morning's front pages now beginning with The Guardian. Grade gets his man as BBC ends month of turmoil, and there we have Mark Thompson in the front. But underneath that, the mystery of who killed Nick Berg, the freelance contractor beheaded on video. It looks like suspects are led by Saddam's nephew. Moving on to Telegraph, again, the top story there is Channel 4 chief is poached for a top BBC job. And then the detective stabbed to death after chasing a man. That's that story in Birmingham this afternoon. Financial Times, ahead of the OPEC summit tomorrow. Saudi's bid to boost oil flow to capacity. Martha Stewart case perjury charge. Daily Mail, detective stabbed to death. On the right-hand side, the woman who tried to sell her baby in the web has been jailed. The Sun, cop knifed to death. He died a hero. And the front page of the Times, big spending, Britain's rack up debts of £1 trillion. Well, that's all from Newsnight tonight. Jeremy will be back and more on Monday. And then from Mark and me and all the team, have a great weekend. Good night.